welcome to Session 0 of our Dragons the Nine Realms campaign. Just in case anyone came here for the narrative critique and is a little confused, I'll give a quick outline, but I'll start with a disclaimer. I am true neutral towards Dragons the Nine Realms. If you like it, that's cool. If you don't like it, that's cool too. I enjoyed the first few seasons. They gave me nostalgia for playing pretend as a kid, but ultimately it wasn't really enough to keep me coming back. That would be the 51% on Rotten Tomatoes. So, while narrative critiques can sometimes come with a negative connotation to them, I'm really just making a few observations about what I believe caused the downfall of the show. So, we'll start off with our narrative critique. We will then move on to giving each character a writing spotlight section. After that, we'll get to the more standard Session 0 stuff. We'll talk about the rules that are unique to this campaign. We'll go over character sheets. And lastly, we'll do a little bit of rolling. But before I can do any of that, I do have to go over a couple topics. So if you're here for the narrative critique, then I'll put a timestamp for where you can go to just get right to that. But otherwise, I need to address a mistake I made in my previous video. I claimed that I would exclusively be improvising, with the exception of your standard Dungeon Master materials like NPC or location notes, encounter tables, a rough outline of the campaign that will inevitably get thrown out the window. And at the time, I failed to consider how this would affect my credibility during narrative critiques. With that in mind, I decided to instead treat them more like essays, where, taking notes on the source material, mapping out important points, and using outside resources for information when necessary. Moving on to the next thing, we're going to have to talk about the Dragon Companions. I originally wanted to host a vote asking whether people would prefer to see the original Nine Realms companion dragons that they had in the show, those being Thunder the Nightlight, Wuenwei the Mist Twister, Plowhorn the Gembreaker, Feathers the Featherhide, and Webmaster the Deadly Spinner, or if people would prefer dragons off of encounter tables. I quickly realized the impracticality of trying to host a vote like that so soon, and with no context. So today's session will be serving as context for the vote we will be holding instead. I am rolling with the encounter tables, but I'm implementing a few rules in the interest of fairness to those who would have liked to see the Nine Realms dragons. The first of which is that I'm giving them a boosted encounter rate on our encounter tables that we'll be rolling on. The other thing is that I will be implementing a viewer override system. And what this means is that once we have the results for the dragons, I will make a community about each one, giving you the option to override the dragon or to keep it for a respective character. And at the end of 2 weeks, which will be the voting period, if 51% or more of people want a dragon to be overridden, then we'll override it. As far as the override process goes, I would appreciate if you let me know what you like instead. And you can either do this through commenting what dragon you want for a character, or you can do this by liking somebody else's comment if they want the same dragon as you. And at the end of the voting period, if there's no clear winner through likes and comments for a specific dragon, we'll put all of the requested dragons for a respective character onto an encounter table, and we'll roll on those. It doesn't feel fair to restrict the vote to only Nine Realms dragons. I'm doing this in the interest of fairness because I don't want to overly favor the D&D side of things or the storytelling side of things. Another important argument for not putting restrictions on is that Dragons the Nine Realms did this themselves. We had dragons from the original franchise like the Nightlight and the Razor Whip and the Monstrous Nightmare, and we had a Rescue Rider's dragon tossed in there once, that being the Bubblehorn. Said there are a couple of rules I need you guys to follow, one of which being that I need whatever dragon you want to be something that can fly or glide. That's kind of the caveat or the thing, the gimmick that dragon shows tend to use. And on top of that, just please don't make me regret this by asking for like some character to get 4 terrible terrors instead of 1 full-size dragon or something. It'd be fun, but it'd also be a little overwhelming. With all of that, lights, camera, action, everyone! Now that we're at the narrative critique, what topics do I want to address? The first is going to be representation, specifically some concerns I have about how it was done in the Nine Realms. The next is going to be messaging, which is more like the events that they used in order to get the messages that they wanted. But a couple quick disclaimers before we get to talking about representation. The first is that I know it's a very volatile subject in filmmaking and storytelling, and I'm not here to get into the politics of it. I'm just here to form an educated discussion on how representation was done in Dragons the Nine Realms. The next thing is that I don't believe the writers had any ill intent with the choices they made, and I'm not creating this section to throw shade or to be mean to anybody. In fact, I'm even going to be advocating for what I think was actually happening behind the scenes with the writing for the stuff that I'm going to be talking about. While I welcome all of your guys' perspectives in the comments, I do ask that you, like me, are respectful. And now we can get going. My first concern is whether or not Carla and Hazel were unfairly sidelined. Right off the bat, before I introduce anyone who hasn't seen the show to these characters, it's a popular trope, especially in the kids' fantasy genre, to sideline the adults as quickly as possible. It's an easy way to just justify the amount of trouble that the main kid characters get up to. And it did happen to all of the parents. So, with that being said, let me introduce you to the characters. Carla and Hazel Gonzalez are a lesbian couple in Dragons the Nine Realms, and they are Alex's moms. So, today I'm going to be going over every appearance we see of Carla and Hazel up to and including Season 5, because Season 5 has a narrative focus that sort of started this concern in motion. Our first introduction to them is in Season 1, Episode 5, where they share an episode with Alex. And it starts off really sweet. They invite Alex to go on a night hike with them because they have the night off work. Alex doesn't want to go because she's afraid of pretty much everything, especially the outdoors. And although they try to be encouraging, they ultimately respect their daughter's decision to stay behind. We won't see them again until later in the episode, after Alex has accidentally lured a dragon to her house and, by proxy, all the other kids who are trying to help her deal with the situation. And Carla and Hazel come back temporarily from their night hike. They see all the kids there and they assume Alex invited them. And they're really sweet here. They help the kids set up a movie, they make them some popcorn, but they can tell that Alex is still really on edge. And they conclude that this is because Alex is feeling overcrowded, having both her friends and her moms there. So they decide to go hiking again. We see them one final time when they almost catch Alex and her new dragon hanging out in the woods, where we hear them talking about how they still wanted her to be with them. And they get a cameo in the next episode as each of the kids and their respective parents are shown reacting to an earthquake. But then we will not see them until a full season later for season 2, episode 6. And in this, they are outside doing some gardening when Eugene is looking for his sister, June, and he comes up, he's like, "Hey, have you seen my sister?" They can't give him the information he wants, so he leaves, and after he does, they kind of laugh at him for trying to act like he's responsible. And then we get season 3, episode 3, where they share an episode with Alex again. It starts off with them really missing her and being upset that she's gone all the time. But at the same time, they're happy for her because things are going great for her. She's out with her friends, she's socializing, she's being a lot more adventurous. And after she gets back, they are talking a little bit, and Carla and Hazel find a dragon that Alex accidentally brought home. They catch it, they start studying it, and they get really attached to it. They even come up with pet names for the dragon. And Alex has to steal it back, and it should be noted that it does actually upset her that she's going to have to hurt her parents in this way. But they catch her trying to steal it back. They get into a sort of pseudo-conflict where they accuse her friends of actually being a bad influence, and Alex is like, "No, I'm stealing this dragon to release it back to its habitat because none of the adults have the know-how or resources to keep this thing alive outside of its home." And after this, they do agree to assist Alex and June in rescuing the dragon, which really just amounts to them distracting one adult while the kids run off. And then in the end of the episode, we get a sweet moment with Alex and her moms where she's taken the day off from being a dragon rider in order to hang out with them. In season 4, episode 1, Carla and Hazel kind of chuckle at Olivia a little bit because of her frustrated response to a experiment that she's trying to work on. We then see them in episode 4 of this season, where they talk with Alex a few minutes and reminisce about their past adventures before the kids go off to do their own thing. And then we won't see them till season 5, episode 4, then we won't see them again till season 5, episode 4, so another full season of them being gone, and they're trying to comfort Olivia because they can tell she's really stressed about something, but they don't know what it is, and she doesn't tell them. But it's still a sweet gesture from the two. And in that season's finale, they also are shocked and a little angry when they find out about the whole dragon riding secret that Alex was keeping. So now I can talk about season 5. They had a unique little subplot going on in season 5 where Olivia discovered earlier than the other parents that Tom was a dragon rider. And she then spends the season having a moral crisis about whether she cares more about spoiling her son or being a responsible parent. And this also makes her worry about what the other parents would think about. Now, I get why they used Olivia. Tom is the only main character, and they needed her to advance his legacy arc. But that kind of just turns her into a walking, talking Ancestry.com, doesn't it? And really, this question wouldn't be the worst thing. And really, this question isn't inherently bad to be giving to one of the parent characters, but Olivia would have been completely in the right to just ban Tom from dragon riding. And I know the writers never would have been nice enough to frame it that way had things actually panned out that way. The problem is that Tom and Thunder at no point have been particularly responsible for the former's safety. And then Olivia decides to let Tom keep exploring the hidden world because of Thunder. So, pretty big error in judgment there. But there's also the fact that she's just completely passive this entire season. Like, it's not even directly her fault that the dragons get found out. So what happens is that in the finale there's a really bad storm. Olivia and Philip try to fly out and get some supplies, and she crashes her helicopter into the side of the cliff. The characters have to use all their dragons to save her and Philip's life, and this ends up revealing them, rather than Olivia just telling the parents like she threatened to so many times. So, in all, I just can't really argue that she's a good candidate for this family dragon rider subplot. But now let's take a look at Carla and Hazel instead. First off, Season 1, Episode 5 establishes right away that what they care about most is Alex and what's best for her. And Season 3, Episode 3 tells us that they will always hear Alex out. So, let's look at the question with that in mind. Carla and Hazel have to decide what's best for Alex. Is it her personal growth? Because her dragons, her adventure, her friends, they're incredible for helping Alex be less afraid all the time. So it really seems like she needs them. But Alex needs to be safe too, and can you really rely on Alex and Feathers, her one small dragon, to ensure that safety? So ultimately the question would have been a lot harder to answer, and probably would have taken more than 2 episodes, like it did with Olivia. Just to be fair, I'll entertain the question of would they tell the other parents? I think yes, but before we get a, interesting little bit of drama of, is there any way they can compromise on this? Alex doesn't want the dragons to be found out because she thinks people will harm the dragons, but her moms, need to do the right thing to do parenting-wise. Although I think in the end there isn't really a way you can compromise on, oh yeah, your kid's a dragon rider. But to reiterate, Carla and Hazel were better candidates for the Season 5 family subplot, and I feel concerned about the writers choosing to overlook this. Next, let's talk about Philip Baker. The idea they had wasn't inherently bad, where you want an antagonist who's not a villain, well, a security guard who's enforcing the rules, versus your main characters who are always breaking them. Yeah, it's been done and it's a solid choice. On to the introduction. Philip is a security officer at Icarus, specifically the chief security officer, and he is D'Angelo's dad. Sources like writershelpingwriters.net and wordpress.com advise against writing black characters whose core trait is that they are angry. And I'm going to make the argument here that Philip tips a little too much into a sort of gray area for this one. And we'll go over only his scenes in Season 1, because I really believe this was just the writers getting off on the wrong foot and being unable to recover. So, his introductory scene is in the first episode, where it starts off okay. Tom and June are hanging out waiting for Phil's security tour to start, and Phil joins them. He says they're waiting for 2 other kids. D'Angelo comes up and he's really excited that he's on time, which is honestly very sweet and actually a good point for Phil. Especially since Phil, in a few minutes, rewards this behavior. Phil rewards D'Angelo for this by giving him a little shout out during their roll call. But then, backtracking just a sec, Alex shows up and she accidentally jump scares Phil. And I guess this was enough to earn her his ire, because things go downhill from here, fast. So I'll give a quick bit of context. And Alex She is basically hiding behind her tablet when the 4 people around her are paying her literally no mind. So when Phil is looking at her, standing over her, and asking her to say her name for roll call, she physically is unable to speak. She can barely make any sound. And Phil starts bullying her for this. Like, he keeps insisting that she say her name louder, all of that. When she's standing right in front of him and he could easily just mark her on the attendance. And of course it figures Tom is the one who sticks up for Alex. He goes in and he's like, hey, knock it off. Alex said she's here. And I'm guessing what they were doing was trying to make Tom look good, but why at the expense of Philip, especially when literally a few minutes later Tom is going to try to save somebody's life. And Phil does kinda give Alex this really weird apology at the end of the scene where he is telling all the kids to be quiet while they're on the elevator, and he tells Alex she's fine. But next we do have a good scene with Philip in actually the same episode. He and Tom are talking after Tom tried to save a scientist, and he commends Tom for his bravery while also being like, you really can't do something like that again. Because Tom tried to rescue her, but then got himself into a position where he also needed to be rescued. And overall, a nice scene for Philip. We then get a scene in episode 2 that's reasonable and neutral. Tom has just been caught trespassing for a second time. Philip is annoyed and escorts Tom home. And then later in the episode, we get another good Philip moment because he's talking to Olivia and he tells her that, I really don't resent Tom for being a rule breaker. I just want to make sure that he, gets on the proper path in life. But then I don't get why he can't extend the same courtesy to either Alex or his own son. But that's the introductory scene and later seasons respectively, so let's move on. We then get a really bad scene for him. What happens is that Tom, in episode 3, tricks a sheep into ramming into Philip. And Phil doesn't see that Tom does this, he just turns around after he gets attacked. And he bends over, stares the sheep in his eyes, and growls at it until it runs away. Which is really weird. Like, they were trying to be funny, judging from the subtitles being like, oh, the sheep is embarrassed. And now I'm just gonna take a second to have a quick gripe about something. Philip does a terrible job of sticking to his role as an antagonist. The problem here is that, look at this, trait that we see. The problem here is, let's look at those two scenes again, the introductory scene and the sheep scene. What did they have in common? His reactions to slights or whatever are completely inappropriate and overblown for what it is that's going on. And can you guess who he shares that with? The 2 main villains of the show. Okay, to be fair, he also shares it with later seasons June, and she's supposed to be on the good side, but she's too naive to be remotely effective at that. But obviously what Sludkin and Buzzsaw do is far more extreme, but it's the same basic principle. The things that are setting them off are minor and their responses are major. So, I don't agree with them having this similarity. I don't agree with them having this similarity because there's supposed to be a difference between an antagonist and a villain. Just something to think about. But then we have season 1, episode 4, and that's a solid episode. And that gives us a solid Philip moment, where where despite his reservations about Tom, he's happy to let Tom, D'Angelo, and June all have dinner together at his house. Then we get to the next episode. He's neutral here. He thinks there's a security hazard happening because somebody's wandering out past curfew, and you get why he's being intimidating. That's his job if there's a situation going on. So then we get to episode 6, and that's where things get a little iffy. Alex messes with the security systems so the kids can sneak in and use some equipment. Phil gets notified that something weird is going on, and he goes and he starts searching the research station property. He eventually finds the equipment that the kids used, and he thinks that somebody is messing with him, and he gets angry, and he personally threatens whoever is doing this. Which, okay, fine, he thinks something dangerous is happening. His son, one of the people responsible for this, is hiding within earshot. I don't intend to be patronizing here. I will always advocate for kids deserve good stories and good filmmaking and all that. But my worry here is that, not every kid is going to be able to read the subtext and figure out why Phil is acting the way he is. I mean, as a kid, I had difficulty with subtext. I thought frijoles was a bad word for a while. It's Spanish for beans, but the teacher got annoyed at a kid who was saying it in class. And kid me couldn't pick up on the fact that this teacher's annoyed because a student is talking while they're trying to talk. So, for me, that kind of tips this scene into a negative for Phil. But to reiterate, my concern is that between Philip's shared trait of exaggerated anger with the villains, and because of the bad scenes that they gave him, that Phil just tips a little too close to stereotyped writing for comfort. But with that, let's move on to the messaging. I'm sure everybody's immediately expecting me to talk about the ending, and I promise I'll get there, but I want to just touch on Tom's legacy arc a little bit. Obviously, I'm going to save the majority of that for his spotlight section, but there's a little bit we can talk about. For anyone who hasn't seen the show, here's a quick summary. Tom knows his ancestors were Vikings, and he's really excited about it. He doesn't know any individually, and he isn't interested in learning them, but, it is what it is. And he gets really curious once his dragon recognizes his family heirloom symbol. And so he concludes that one of his ancestors must have been a dragon rider. Risky call considering the dragon hunters also had a dragon symbol, but okay. And Tom starts finding these Viking artifacts left and right in the hidden world. Eventually he finds out that this mysterious ancestor was Hiccup Haddock, and he, wants to be like him. Towards the later seasons, he becomes self-aware that he is constantly failing at this, and they, sort of have a philosophy debate about why. We ultimately conclude that Tom cannot be like Hiccup because he is not meant to be. And that's really good, right? Well, until they say that's because he's destined to be like Astrid. It really sounds like star sign stuff to begin with. So, which I guess is why Tom ended up with June, but let's reframe this as just the message. They're trying to say that your ancestors determine who you are. And because we've never gotten an explanation for Tom's just innate goodness, you have to assume that that's coming from Hiccup and Astrid. So, your ancestors determine who you are. I don't think you need a 3/4 German woman to explain why that's an issue to be telling people. But, snark aside, how do we fix this? Well, I think a good starting point is thinking about legacy differently. I think a good starting point is answering what legacy even is. I'm not talking the dictionary definition. I do welcome your perspectives in the comments, but I would answer that legacy is, whether naturally or willingly, developing a skill or trait reflective of somebody you love or admire. Without coming across as oversharing, my philosophy comes from my mom's side of the family, where we've had at least 3 generations of storytellers. There's probably been more that I don't know of yet, but I believe that each generation passed on this love of storytelling to the next. But legacy and individuality are not mutually exclusive. One storyteller might be more a musician, or another might be a writer. With this in mind, is there anything we can talk about in this section as far as events go? Not really. Okay, joking aside, yes, we can discuss the history that Dragons the Nine Realms decided to work with. That's the idea that at some point Hiccup returned to the Hidden World, spent an extended period of time living there and making a new book of dragons, and trapping a dragon. And I believe I see what the writers actually wanted to do with this in relation to Tom's legacy arc, and I'm in favor of it. It seems like they were initially just trying to throw shade at Hiccup briefly for the sake of throwing some shade at Tom and his legacy arc, and throwing some doubt for Tom to work through, which is actually pretty natural in character arcs. But I guess maybe they ran out of time. Here's my evidence for that. The first is the ambiguity with this dragon trap, because they only ever call it a dragon gate. It's only in a note where they say that it was a trap. On top of that, it doesn't look like your traditional trap. It's a gate and then an endless cavern on the other side. There's also the fact that there's no metal or anything on the floor of this supposed cage that would stop this dragon from just tunneling to the other side if it really cared. So what I believe actually happened here was that it was supposed to be, they temporarily think Hiccup trapped your dragon, and Tom worries about the morality of that, only for them to eventually realize that there's, who knows how much space on the other side. Because remember, the Hidden World is supposed to stretch all over the globe. And Tom would be through this period of doubt. I guess we do have to address the dragon's behavior. The whole idea is that it's very human-like. If we're being cynical, which this show has no shortage of cynicism, because the dragon just goes around destroying everything for no reason. But if we were looking at this in the context of a real-world animal, I would guess that Jormungandr is an animal with no niche that it's currently fitting into. Quick explanation for people who might not know. Basically think of food webs. A fish gets eaten by a seal gets eaten by an orca. These animals have these different roles that they fit into, and so I think that was what was behind Jormungandr's behavior. That, and then we have to answer the question, how does it end up without a niche? Well, it's possible that this is a Titan wing in a species that rarely ever has them, or it's possible this one has gigantism, and what's happening is that this Jormungandr dragon needs a lot more food to survive and to sustain itself, and it can't really get that wherever it's from. So, to conclude, really what I'm going to do with that modification of the legacy arc is that I'm going to put back in place what the writers originally were going to do. Maybe not necessarily using the methods that they did, but, same basic philosophy. Throw shade at Hiccup, throw shade at Tom, but in the end, resolve the confusion. Next, let's finally talk about the long-awaited ending. If anyone doesn't know, it's literally the same as the ending to How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World. Dragons: The Nine Realms has a very emotional ending. I'm just 90% sure that emotion wasn't supposed to be secondhand embarrassment. But I'm going to be talking about this with the Dragon's Return ending, which did not happen, with the Dragon's Leaving ending, which did happen, and then I'm going to be talking about the third potential, the Compromise ending. We can be pretty short and sweet with the first ending. While it would have been better for the overall messaging, because then doing good actually makes things better, from a practicality standpoint, it's probably the worst ending that could happen. I'd allow it if DreamWorks wanted to make a spin-off show dealing with the ecological disaster that the Dragon's Return would cause. So, the problem with the Dragons returning all of a sudden is that the world would not be ready for it. And I'm not talking about, humans, because go figure we wouldn't be ready for it. Environmental science, basically. Things in the hidden world. It's self-sufficient, so they have to have some sort of pre-established food web and stuff going on. But then you also have the normal world. In the 1,300 years that the dragons have been gone, the world's filled the spots that they once occupied. The dragons coming back, suddenly they're competing with whatever took their place, and environmentally this would be a pretty substantial shift. Now let's talk about the ending that happened. Touch on why it worked for the hidden world. Context. Context is everything. In the 6 years that the dragons were, at peace with Burke and with the humans, Useless never really got a break. He was constantly defending Burke from their enemies, constantly defending his Darwinistic best friend, and, doing an incredible job of it. But by the time the hidden world rolls around, he's had 6 years of fighting, basically, and it makes sense that he'd be tired. So when the Light Fury comes along, leads him to the hidden world, and is this perfect sanctuary, of course he's gonna want to stay. The only thing holding him back is Hiccup. By the end, Hiccup has come to terms with this, and with his blessing, Toothless retires. You can't build in 6 months what you could build in 6 years, and no one was expecting them to. If anything, it really just makes Thunder seem like a quitter, because they faced 5 total bad humans out of 100 or so good ones that they knew. And the final straw that broke the camel's back was Thunder's fault to begin with. When Tom was in danger from the Sky Torture Dragon, Thunder decided to release Jormungandr to defeat it rather than trying to fight it himself. So Thunder blaming the humans for something that he did is kind of messed up. But moving past all the joking moving past all the jokes I could make about this ending, it's not an inherently bad idea. It's actually very similar to something Cressida Cowell said in her original books. I believe it was book 9, had the theme that history is not a perfect circle. So I'm going to describe this scene to you before I describe how they could have used this in order to make the Dragon's Leaving ending work. Hiccup is on a dangerous mission, and he needs the help of this dragon who is guarding an item he needs. And he's trying to talk it through with it. And he's trying to talk to the dragon rather than just fighting it. And the dragon is very cynical. He's like, I got betrayed. And he tells the story of how he got betrayed, which is very similar to the story of how another dragon got betrayed. So this dragon's talking about that. He's also like, the other idealistic friend I had, who said he was going to change all these things, in the grand scheme of things, he really didn't do much. He didn't live long enough, because humans don't live nearly as long as dragons. And Hiccup is like, but maybe your friend did make a difference. Maybe it's just hard to see because the world is so big. So in essence, the dragon is saying history is a circle, it's just going to keep repeating itself, and Hiccup is saying it's not. And he suggests that this dragon, Odin's Fang's friend, sort of tipped that circle out of balance. That just that this is going to keep happening, that yes, history will repeat itself, but so will that good person who comes and knocks things out of alignment to make things better. And this does end up changing Odin's Fang's mind. And he asks Hiccup, can you promise that if I help you, you're going to succeed? And Hiccup's like, I promise, I will try. And this is everything later in the book. I won't spoil it, but the fact that he promised to try changes everything. And ultimately, they could have played this card with the ending. What if all those Viking artifacts that Tom was finding that I mentioned in the Legacy arc portion, what if they were all from other failed heroes who ended with a dragon, who tried to prepare the world for dragons, each in their own way, but the world just wasn't ready. So then, here you could have Tom, and things still went south, they're still not ready, or they don't believe they are, and so they part ways on much less sour terms than they did in the original show, where they leave and Tom and the other kids are like, we're gonna work on making the world ready for dragons. Now let's talk about a compromise ending. You run into issues with the ending that they originally chose, because in a show where they're constantly talking about the importance of doing good, they end by saying that none of the good mattered, but you run into some practicality issues with all the dragons coming back. And also, this compromise ending would be a really sweet parallel to humans and dogs. The whole theory of their evolution is that the ones who weren't scared of humans became friendly with humans, and the ones who weren't chill with humans just kept living in their wild lives. On top of that, it would also be rewarding the characters who did good deeds, who properly bonded with the dragons. And it would be saying that the good you do does matter, even if, like I mentioned in my previous section, even if the scale's not always something we're going to be able to see. This is the ending I'm going to be aiming for in my campaign. Hopefully the dice deities allow me to do that. Also the people making requests. And with that, we will, in just a second, move on to the final section. I did want to just give a quick reminder here that I am allowing requests for narrative direction or narrative events, because D&D is a collaborative storytelling experience. Now let's move on to the pacing section. There's two things I want to cover. One is going to be I'll call it location progression, because I've never seen anybody give it an actual name, just a description. And then we're also going to talk about power progression. Starting off with location progression, it's not really the hidden world that's the issue. They're mostly okay going to one realm per season, except for a couple where they do something weird. They'll visit one realm, Svartalheim, for only one episode, or where they'll discover two realms in one season, like in season 4 with the Asgard realm and the Niflheim realm. But for the most part, they're pretty standard about it. But really it's the surface world that's causing issues. It's pretty much completely static. Like, you'll see a few things getting discovered in the background as the kids are going off on their adventures. And that is mostly fine. It's really just that when we start off season 6 with dragons everywhere, which, yes, that's a pun and intended, I kinda got pacing whiplash, and I imagine quite a few other people did too. because all of a sudden there's this major change. My fix for this would honestly just be showing us the town growing. I mean, this has gotta be a painful loss for the research company, because here they built at least 24 fully functional homes and a massive science building, all for it to completely get destroyed in 6 to 8 months after it was built. Maybe starting off with something smaller, starting off with like yurts or something, which I imagine is what the dome buildings are even inspired by in the show, where the scientific building would, still be prepped and all of that, but that would be the top priority anyway, because that's where they're doing their sciencey stuff. As time is going on, as they're finding out that this fissure is more and more promising, they start to build more permanent structures. They replace some of the yurts with proper buildings. It also would have given it a nice small town feel, which, if you're trying to make people feel nostalgic, that's an easy one to go for. And then we have the bigger issue in the location progression, which is the tension. Season 1, the adults don't find out about the dragons, and that's fine. But they sort of tease that Season 2 will deal with that happening, both in their trailers when the dragons suddenly have saddles, and also with the fact that at the end of Season 1, Olivia saw Tom and Thunder. Nothing proceeds to happen in Season 2. Season 3's trailer suggested that the dragons were going to get discovered in Season 3, literally saying that the secret's over. But nothing happened in Season 3, other than a couple people finding out about the dragons, but then not exposing it to the world. And then Season 4, we finally get something in the form of Olivia finding out that Thunder exists at the very end. You have to wait for the entirety of Season 5 for Mjolnir to drop and the dragons to get revealed. And at that point, it's just kind of too late. What they were suffering from is something that's very common in horror movies as well. This like hide and seek game that they like to play between the protagonists and the villains, where it is great to drum up tension for sure, but eventually you're just going to tire out your audience and they're just going to be waiting for something to snap, but not in that good, exciting, can't wait to get jump scared way, in that, oh my gosh, just let it be over kind of way. I don't really want to criticize them too much for falling into this trap, because it's an easy one to fall into. It's just something to be aware of, and I would suggest having the dragons get revealed earlier, towards what the rising action would be in a standard 3-act story structure, which would probably place it somewhere around Season 3 if we're looking at the pyramid structure thing. And now we can talk about the power progression. Let's look at it. So the kids start out, they get their full-size dragons right away, which is okay. I can see why you would want to just focus on getting all the kids their dragons in Season 1. It does mean that Tom very easily takes out 3 Gembreaker dragons. They're a little inconsistent with this though, because he later gets destroyed by the same 3 dragons, only for Plowhorn and D'Angelo to come in and rescue them. But, all this power scaling, all this power progression should mellow out once we get to the finale, right? Kinda. Tom, June, D'Angelo, they can do literally nothing against the Fault Ripper dragon. They need Alex to come in and save the day, and so she does. And then Season 2, there's really no important battles until the last 2 episodes, and the kids kind of chew through those battles until they get to the Skrill. That's when they're getting completely overpowered, and so Tom grabs this piece of metal, and the idea that this will make them stronger, they do get past the Skrill with this power-up. And then Season 3 comes along. They do have some trouble with some dragons in the Fire Realm called Flamethrowers, which they do have to outsmart, so that's, nice. And then we get to the Sky Torture fight, and Tom has to recruit the Fault Ripper dragon that they defeated previously in order to defeat the Sky Torture. Season 4 doesn't really present us with any important battles until the boss fight again. Now he's got everything. He's got an Alpha Nightlight, he's got his Nightlight, he's got his Lightning Sword, and he's able to use those 3 things to defeat a couple of Snow Wraith dragons. We then get to season 5, and they have a tough time against some speed stingers. Once they do actually strategize, they beat them easily, but season 5 has no major boss fight at the end, understandably. Season 6 has the same thing happening though. Season 7, the kids have a little bit of trouble fighting Buzzsaw. It's not until the Jormungandr fight that anything important really happens, in which Buzzsaw tricks all the kids into releasing Jormungandr, and they finally take an L and he completely embarrasses them. And then we have season 8, and they're basically getting decimated by the Jormungandr dragon for the entire season, until in the very end they recruit the Sky Torture, the Fault Ripper, they get Thunder, the Alpha power-up, and they have Tom's Lightning Sword, which I forgot to mention in season 4 got upgraded so that it could spit lightning like a dragon. All of this put together, well, really just Thunder's powered-up lightning blast is able to defeat Jormungandr. I feel like I've seen the perfect quote to describe Tom and Thunder and the Lightning Sword. It's always them, isn't it? What we're looking at here is static power progression with power-ups only when necessary. I'm sure there's an anime out there that has done this fantastically, but I just don't think it's really a great fit for the How to Train Your Dragon universe, given how it panned out here. I have a lot of explaining to do to support my suggestions that I'm about to make, but I'll do my best. First of all, my podcast is going to be 9 seasons, 7 episodes each. I believe that was originally intended to be the length of the show, for the most part. I definitely think it was supposed to be 9 seasons with 1 realm per season, but specifically with all 7s, they bounce between 6 and 7 in the original show, but somehow I don't think it's a great idea to be giving myself triple bad luck with triple sixes. Really what it is that I just like consistency. I don't like this bouncing back and forth between 6 and 7, so I'm just gonna settle on one of the numbers, and given that I'm new to this, I really want those extra episodes. The next thing I have to argue for is that the kids should have gotten their full-size dragons later. I'm going to suggest that for the first few seasons, the kids should have had either baby or short-winged dragons. Now, baby dragons, it's self-explanatory, but the thing about these dragons is that we have precedents for them being in the show and being paired with human trainers. Being wing maidens in Race to the Edge train them all the time, and these baby dragons do actually allow you to glide, so it's not like you're restricting your character's mobility in the hidden world, if that's what you're worried about. But then we also have the riders caring for a baby dragon in Race to the Edge, and they're hopeless at it. So our 2 precedents are that the baby dragons either get released when they're old enough to go off and do their own thing, or they just get returned to a parent. And I would be following these precedents, though I'm not ditching them immediately once we bring in stronger dragons. Short Wings is gonna need a little more explanation. It was first introduced in the Book of Dragons Short, and specifically was used to refer to teenage dragons, so in between baby and adult. It was expanded upon in the game School of Dragons, which most of the time the games get treated as soft canon, but for their dragon lore, more canon, so I'm going to accept them as canon. And School of Dragons basically said that these short-winged dragons are similar to adult dragons, but they have weaker flying and fighting capabilities. They can still only glide with a human, and they can't do as much damage, but other than that, they're pretty close to the adults. And I'm suggesting that you pair the kids early on with these weaker dragons, and then give them full-size dragons around season 3. And then around season 3, you give the kids these stronger dragons, which, if you'll remember, is around when I said the rising action should start happening. Then we have to talk about the second power-up. I think this should be powering up each of the kids with some sort of item. June got her shield in the original show, and Tom got his sword, and that was it. But I would suggest giving every kid some sort of special thing. And then we also have whatever the final season power-up is going to be. Well, you would have to have the kids starting to prepare for this earlier than season 9. I think the payoff should be in the final season. And this would be one really cool power-up for all the dragons. Take for instance the kids. Okay, say for instance the kids get a Dramillion in the rolling session later tonight. Then we know Dramillion's breath limit is somehow based on temperature, so the kids would try to find a way to increase that capacity. To conclude, I would suggest staggering the major power-ups and putting smaller ones in between. Pretty standard. And now, with the messaging out of the way, I'll give each character a brief spotlight. Now that we've gotten to character sheets, there's a couple disclaimers I need to make, but then we'll get going. The first is that I'm going to be aging all of our main characters up by a couple to a few years, putting them all in the range of 17. I guess this technically makes Eugene 19, if he's 2 years older than June, canonically. I mean, it's what we've got to work with. But all the other characters, Alex, June, Tom, D'Angelo, they're going to be 17. DreamWorks decided to include a romance arc within this story, and unfortunately they took it seriously, which I feel kind of strong-arms me into doing the same. My second disclaimer is that I'm not going to be going into detail into the original characters and their arcs because I feel that that's going to clutter things up and make it too confused. But due to the fact that the information's easily accessible on the wiki, I'm going to be limiting myself to giving you an intro to the characters' personalities, and if I change anything, I will directly call it out and explain it. But without further ado, let's get on to Tom. Tom is film noir meets Gary Stu. It is quite possibly the most opposite set of traits I've ever seen on one character. To those unfamiliar with the trope, film noir could best be described as everybody's first edgy teen OC, but how this relates to Tom is that he has vulnerability issues. He's a loner. And he also has a tragic backstory that does not matter to the actual main story that we're following. And when it comes to Gary Stu traits, that's going to be your naturally virtuous, natural leader. People just follow him for no reason. That's the fact that if people dislike him, it's because they have moral issues. And who can forget they even managed to fit royalty in there? Well, I mean, I think the Austin Powers writers put it best. How about no? Now, before I get into the meat of his arc, I do want to set the ending in our sights, because it's going to be a little bit more complicated given that we've had a couple of discussions that relate to Tom and his arc already. Those being the legacy arc. Now, before we can get into the meat of his arc, I do want to just talk about setting the ending in our sights, because with Tom it's going to be a little bit more complicated since we already had a discussion about his legacy arc earlier. There's two parts to this. One is going to be a metaphor, one is going to be our legacy definition. Working in tandem with the compromise ending, which I will remind you is that some dragons stay, some dragons leave. So I guess 3 factors. But I'm going to explain the metaphor because it might be a little more obscure. We're going to call it the 2 portraits metaphor. Because in Dragons, Riders of Berk, There is an episode titled Portrait of Hiccup as a Buff Man. And despite the self-explanatory name, the outline goes as follows. Stoic and Hiccup get a family portrait made. Stoic looks normal. Hiccup looks like if Instagram filters and Photoshop combined forces to make the ideal Viking. And Hiccup is reasonably upset by this, even more so by the fact that his dad likes the painting. So he goes off on a dangerous quest with all of his friends thinking, oh, I'm going to prove myself to my dad. Stoic, a bit late to the party, does catch wind of what they're up to and goes chasing after them with Gobber in tow, although it takes him almost the entire episode to meet up with them. But while he has Gobber with him, they do have a discussion, and Gobber lets him in on Hiccup's perspective in relation to the painting and in relation to his actions in the episode. Hiccup does complete his quest, and he and Stoic talk a little bit with, the information that Gobber gave Stoic helping out, and they decide to get a new portrait made. And in this one, Hiccup looks correct. Now I would like to remind you all of our legacy definition. Legacy is, whether willingly or naturally, developing a skill or trait reflective of somebody you love or admire. What this means is that Tom can end up being like Hiccup, but it needs to be naturally. It can't be an obligation. Over here we're going to have the true portrait, the fact that legacy needs to be willing, not an obligation, and lastly we have the compromise ending to the story. Let's talk about the false portrait over here though. I'm going to be somewhat retconning a little bit of the historical elements of this show. One being the dragon heirloom symbol, and the other being the fact that Hiccup was completely unknown. I feel like it's a little unlikely that we would get to modern day and Hiccup would be completely forgotten, although I think his image would be distorted. Because if Burke wants to keep the dragons a secret and to protect them, then the best way to do that is to let the world forget that the dragons existed. What this means is that if anyone outside of Burke were to be told the story of Hiccup, or any of the other dragon riders for that matter, they'd have to remove the dragons from the story. I could see an argument being made for, wouldn't they just say that Hiccup's companions helped him out, doing the things that Toothless did? But given that each of the riders already have their own accomplishments, I don't really see the merits in diminishing that by giving them extra credit for the things that Toothless did. So what you would end up with is Hiccup looking far stronger and far braver than he actually was. And I'm not saying he wasn't brave or strong, but Toothless at least doubles that. So we end up in modern times with a very strong and very brave looking Hiccup. Buff Hiccup, in a sense. And this is going to be our false portrait. This is not to say that this is the only memory of Hiccup that has survived to modern day. We have 3 additional elements that are core to Hiccup's character. Those being his status as a dragon rider, we'll get to that. Next is going to be his leadership, and last is going to be his social navigation skills. We're going to be adding these 3 elements to the true portrait of Hiccup over here. And if people remember these elements of Hiccup, why would we have this false portrait? Well, it's going to be shaped by Tom's values, and we'll get to that in just a sec. There is one other change that I need to explain. I'm going to be giving Tom's backstory a bit of a rewrite. I do think that the whole absentee dad thing for Tom was kind of tacked on last minute, because all we ever see of it is a one-liner in the middle of an argument. Also the fact that his dad is nowhere to be seen. So I want to make the fact that Tom's dad is missing important to his legacy arc. We're going to have to get creative because 4 of the main characters have dad issues. What this would look like is that Tom's dad would be his original primary caretaker, and Tom's dad has the same recklessness and rule-breaking issues that Tom does. At some point this lands him into some serious trouble, probably legal, and whatever this event is, lands Tom in the care of Olivia, his mom, instead. and also leaves Tom's parents split up. Tom might not adjust super well to this change immediately. So I think what would happen is that he would try to use Hiccup as a replacement father figure. And the reasoning for his rule breaking might be that he's trying to emulate Hiccup. Because at the start of Tom's arc, the only values he's seeing in Hiccup's portrait are the strength and the bravery. Now, we should remember that the adults at the project, most of them anyway, really don't like Tom. Even at the start of the original series, which is pretty alarming given the whole moral compass thing I mentioned earlier, but it ties into this whole Tom trying to emulate Hiccup thing. If they see Tom's rule breaking and they're like, oh, Tom's dad was just a bad influence on him because of the recklessness, then Tom's attempts at emulating Hiccup are really biting him in the butt. That gets us to the start of his arc. It was a little long-winded, so here's the reminder. Tom's trying to use Hiccup as a replacement for his dad, and his attempts at emulating Hiccup are making the adults at the project not like him. Tom's arc will have 3 sections. An A thread about being a true dragon rider, a B thread about leadership, and a C thread about social navigation. Those 3 elements that I mentioned are missing from Tom's portrait of Hiccup at the start. But the catch is that when Tom finds out that he does have these Hiccup qualities, he can't care. And we'll dive into more depth about that in the C thread. But let's talk about the A thread, the Dragon Rider thread, and this is one more change I'm going to make. I dislike that Tom was the first person to discover the dragons. However, I'm willing to make a compromise and say that he discovered dragons independently of whoever the first modern person to discover the dragons was. You'll hear a little bit more of my argument for that in Alex's Spotlight section. His A thread is going to be that he finds out about the dragons and he's willing to keep them a secret, but not because it's the right thing to do. Bringing in the arrogance that he was meant to have in the original show, I would suggest that Tom wants the first dragon that's going to be discovered in modern times to be one of the heirloom dragons, that being one of the dragons from his heirloom helmet. And sure, that's impossible because that's a Night Fury, but there's other species that look very similar to Night Furies that you could easily get a mix-up on if you didn't know. This arc sees Tom, chasing after one of these heirloom dragons, his whole idea being, I'll tame it and then I'll reveal them to the world, provided that the dice deities want to be nice to me and don't give me a nightlight for Tom. And assuming that he doesn't get that nightlight, I would suggest that this entire arc, he has another dragon who's more than happy to be part of that dragon rider duo thing. Tom is overlooking this dragon, wrongly, and eventually this dragon just is done with Tom's obliviousness and loses interest in him. Once Tom realizes his mistake, he does have to win back the favor of the dragon who would have been by his side from the beginning had he realized it. Next we have his leadership arc, and I'm going to be removing the natural pacifism issue that Tom had in the original show. I'm not saying pacifism is bad, I'm just saying that if you're going to treat it like a good thing, that he cannot stick up for himself, he's really not the right character to give the pacifism trait to. The other reasoning behind it is that it fits a bit better with this whole Tom trying to emulate a brave and powerful Viking character. But that's enough explanation. There's going to be 2 pieces to this arc. One is going to be D'Angelo's influence, and the other is going to be from the boss fights. I'll talk about D'Angelo's influence first, I think. In the original show, if anyone got that far, Season 7 had all the Dragon Riders split up for a little bit. And D'Angelo gets mad, he snaps, and he calls out the stuff that the other riders do that has been getting on his nerves, presumably for 7 seasons. And the thing he calls out Tom for is being a terrible leader. But if we set the group issues sooner, and if we mess around a little bit, D'Angelo's statement can actually be allowed to have some weight to it. Because in the original show, with the exception of Season 8, most of the time Tom was a really successful leader. But now let's talk about the boss fights. Every boss fight, or at least every boss fight during this arc, is going to have some major consequence on Tom. Like, for instance, my Season 1 boss fight that I have planned, the dragon's not just threatening the town for no reason, the dragon is threatening the town because it's guarding its nest. So obviously once Tom takes the dragon out, the nest is going to be the rider's responsibility to take care of now. Or, for instance, Season 2, the boss fight is supposed to give Tom nightmares. I will give the disclaimer here, though, that I'm not writing Tom as having PTSD. Writing mental ailments takes a lot of preparation, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of research. It's out of my comfort zone. I don't think I'm ready to write that well and respectfully, while also having not that much control over what's going on in the story. The other element is that I would not be okay with role-playing that. I know that it's a bit of a stretch in judgment, but role-playing a character with some sort of mental ailment, to me, kind of hits a little too close to what was going on a while back with people faking ailments in order to get attention online. That is that, full stop. And that's also kind of full stop for where I'm talking about the leadership arc for Tom, since I think that's enough examples. Let's move on to his social navigation arc. And this is going to mostly be in the background, kind of like as a way to keep the town, alive and interesting and not static for a while. It's going to kick into high gear once the dragons get revealed. Before then, it's going to be sort of mellow, I would say. It relates to all the adults not liking Tom and seeing Tom's rule breaking as just an extension of his dad, not as an extension of Hiccup. And Tom wants to be associated with Hiccup. Once he gets his group of friends, and as far as people know, he stops breaking rules all the time, they do mellow out on these comparisons. That's the basic vibe until the dragons come in. And then Tom is basically, on a silver platter, handed this fresh, blank slate legacy that he gets to build, because he's one of the first modern dragon riders. What it would look like is that, Tom and the dragon riders are doing dragon rider things, and Tom, he's trying to get people to compare him to Hiccup and probably to Astrid too, I would think. But a lot of the times he's put in these situations where he can't answer the question, what would Hiccup do or what would Astrid do? This would be more a limitation of his character, more so than there's absolutely no answer to what Hiccup or Astrid would do, but it's there. I think the natural route to go in this situation is that at some point the what would I do thing becomes more rewarding than the what would Hiccup or Astrid do. And that is a basic outline for Tom's legacy arc. Now let's jump over to June. To describe her personality, I guess I would say theater-esque. Being that, if you've ever seen an actor or actress on stage during a play, you'll notice that they generally have very expressive faces because they need people in the audience who are further away to still be able to see kind of what they're thinking and feeling. And June is if you took that concept and turned it into a personality. She's also someone's answer to the question, what if Christopher Paolini was a business prodigy rather than a writing one? Those are the two main traits of June that are important to remember. Or really the only ones that you will remember if you watch the show. I'm not sure what her original arc was supposed to be honest, so I will kind of be building from the ground up here. Now, I will kind of be building from the ground up here because I'm not sure what her original arc was even supposed to be. Maybe you could say learning to stick up for her beliefs, but she just gets meaner in the later seasons, which would be a very weird moral to be giving to kids, that sticking up for yourself means being mean. There is going to be stuff I have to discuss for her character. And I will be talking about her and her brother back to back because they will be sharing a family arc. This is fantasy. Asking siblings to share something doesn't have to go bad here. To start out this arc, I'm going to be talking about June's family. Well, how I'm going to be rewriting it anyway. In the original show, it's another case of the dad's absent and that's all we get. Other than the fact that knowing that June did actually like her dad, and her mom's a pain in the butt about it. So, we'll start off rewriting this disapproving parent trope because writers have done it to death lately. May likes to badger June about becoming a CEO, even though May herself is not a CEO, so it's kind of hypocritical. And also, June's maybe, 14 or 15? She has a few more years before she has to start taking career path-based courses. What I'm going to say here is that make June's mom the CEO of literally anything, please, or even just a small business owner or something. Because then what you would have is a much more sympathetic bit of beef between these two, because it could be a situation where when June was little, she was really excited about her mom's company or whatever, and she had all these ideas about it. May was like, okay, someday June should be the one to take over taking care of things, because she's got ideas, she's got passion, this is great. The problem we run into, though, is that in modern day, June is not like that, and May doesn't know that June's not like that or not interested anymore. So that's the changes I'm making as far as May and June go, for the most part, but we do need to talk a little bit about June's absentee dad. It wasn't a complete copy of Tom. We know that June actually likes her dad. Really what we have here is me filling in a blank spot. Really what we have here is me just filling in the blanks. I would say that, we know that a lot of June's traits overlap with her dad in terms of her interest in cultures, mythology, and storytelling. All we know about June's dad in the original show is that she's maybe something of a carbon copy of him in terms of personality and interests. What we have is that in the backstory, and yes, there's a little bit of retconning going on here in terms of June's personality, but that's about it. When June is little, June's mom and dad divorce. June doesn't really understand it, but she does wind up stuck with her mom. June, not really understanding this, tries to turn herself into a carbon copy of May to make sure that May keeps loving her. So she hides her elements of herself that are like her dad, like her interests, and she just starts pretending to be like May. Because we need to explain why this misunderstanding about June's interests would even last into adulthood. This gets us to modern day. And what this is going to look like, however, instead of May just criticizing June every chance she gets, and in what I'm going to be calling a reverse mirror effect arc, what we're going to have is over here, June and her mom in a really bad relationship type place, where May is making efforts and being really nice to June, and she does get a little pushy sometimes with the whole training to be a business owner thing. But June is absolutely not having any of it, good or bad, from May. So she's cold or whatever. And over here on this side, we're doing a little bit more retconning. I would suggest that you start the June and Sledkin thing earlier. In the original show, June did distract her with asking her questions about her job. So you could have Sledkin tutoring June, and they're on as close to friendly terms as you can get with one of the villain characters, where June is actually nice to Sledkin and all that, but Sledkin's kind of cold. So here's your two threads, and as the story goes on, they're sort of going to go in opposite directions until they crisscross. So over here you have June and Sledkin as enemies by the end, and you have June and her mom over here being healthy and, happy with each other. And as far as a personal arc goes, you definitely want it to not overshadow the family arc that's happening, so it would have to be smaller scale. But it could be just as simple as June becoming more comfortable with her hidden interests. And I just realized, Tom would probably be a complete pain to June if she had Sledkin as a tutor or something. But you know what? I'll take that over the weirdness in the original show. That is going to be June's character, and that's going to be June's arc. Let's move on to her brother now and complete everything that's going on with the family arc. Eugene is the character who you laugh at his expense The universe laughs at his expense, and he's there to make you feel bad for the main characters, but also to make you be like, oh, they're so virtuous, they're letting this annoying person hang out with them. But at the same time, there's this hidden maturity and sadness to his character that we see for one episode only. That sets our foundation for his character, but also for his character arc. Family relationships, I'm not really changing anything at all, honestly, because we already have a solid start. May spoils Eugene like crazy. But the thing is, none of her spoiling is personal. I mean, in the original show, if they didn't give an word-for-word explanation for May's behavior, I would have just assumed this was some way that she was trying to spite June. As far as impersonal spoiling goes, I mean, the first example that comes to mind is the fact that she cuts Eugene's crust off of his bread to show that she really cares about her son. He's 17 in the original show. No 17-year-old asks for that. What I'm going to be focusing on for his family arc is this idea that he doesn't like May's spoiling, but he's tolerating it because he knows how bad things are between her and June, and he wants to make her feel better. Not a healthy way to go about making her feel better, but that's the point of positive arcs anyways, to start in a bad place and end in a good one. He's also going to be getting a little bit more of a personal arc than June. It's kind of like flip-flopped, where there's a major focus on June's family arc, less so on her personal arc. Eugene gets more of a personal arc, and less so of a family arc. The family arc is happening where June and May aren't getting along, and I think it needs to be Eugene who, calls out what's even going on to begin with, because I don't think June has quite the first major element of Eugene's family arc, aside from just joining the Dragon Riders, so now he and June have to deal with each other more often, is going to be the fact that Eugene needs to be the one calling out June on the familial situation, or explaining it to her. So once they get to that milestone, things are going to be improving between Eugene and his mom, and a bit more too between Eugene and June, as Eugene's personal arc is going on. Now let's talk about his personal arc. His whole character is based on, he thinks he's charismatic, but he's actually super abrasive. Everybody not so subtly either thinks he's a joke or just hates him. He acts immature as well, but then secretly he's mature and he's sad and he's aware of his social standing. Let's actually start at the beginning though. This has got to be insult to injury, because he's sacrificing a lot for June, only for her and her friends to look down on him because he gets spoiled and because he acts immature. And sure, the immaturity thing's not helping his case, but considering that Eugene wants to be the leader of the Dragon Riders in the original show, you could work with this. And so he's often going off to do his own thing, going off to do his own heroics, and the riders usually have to step in and save him. But every time this is happening, he is actually improving his strategies. Maybe between how the riders have been towards him and his failures in these solo hero missions, and then lastly, the group breakup, maybe he just gets discouraged and he stops trying to be charismatic in this way that is harming him. And it's at this point that he actually starts to see success, that people start to respect him. People respect him because he's not just being obnoxious anymore. And I'm not saying get rid of the prankster elements of his character. Prankster characters can be a ton of fun. And really the issue that Eugene has is this spiteful element to all of it. So he sort of just relaxes into that role a bit. And because things are going better between June and May, he's also getting spoiled less, so he can be happy about that. And once the writers do get back together, Eugene has still been improving his strategies to a point where he does start to earn the writers' respect. Now let's talk about D'Angelo, also known as the "why aren't you the main character?" He's kind of on the nervous side when it comes to personality, and he has this near godlike admiration for his dad, and they even gave him a really great internal conflict. He has this admiration for his dad that I just mentioned, and he really wants to make his dad proud and happy, but the issue is being a dragon rider doesn't mesh with this, but he likes being a dragon rider, or at least he likes having his dragon companion. All of that seems like perfect setup for a main character. He's another one where I'm going to be giving him more of a family-focused arc than a personal arc, but he's getting both. And that's because I really think that him and his dad have so much potential that I don't really want to overshadow it. And we'll go over his personal arc first. D'Angelo is going to be the group pacifist. And that's because he's just more suited to it. And that's because in the backstory of the original show, at some point during her military service, D'Angelo almost lost his mom. You've got to imagine that's going to be, like, horrifying or traumatizing for a kid. It's like, even after she's been presumably honorably discharged, he's still got his dad out in the military doing military stuff. And I think this is why D'Angelo practically worships his dad in the way that he does. It seems like it would be a coping mechanism for a kid who doesn't know if their parent's going to come home at the end of their deployment period. And the one last bit of argument I can give for D'Angelo being the pacifist is that he just knows too much. I mean, he's the team vet, so he also, anytime they're flying into the battle, he knows what could happen to them. He knows the gritty details of, like, fighting, you would think, but there's just a lot of evidence that this would be a very stressful thing for him to deal with. On top of that, it puts the dragon's secret in pretty substantial risk if any of them have to explain how they got hit by a stray bolt of lightning when there's not a cloud in the sky. And I think you would have other more minor things stressing him out with the other characters, which could explain why he snaps them. For all the things she's afraid of, Alex does look at the world with a remarkable bit of sarcastic humor. And that could be stressing him out because she's calling out these things that he's afraid of, or that the writers are afraid of, or whatever. And she's joking about it. I mean, as far as June getting on his nerves, I could see that coming from her being like, oh, being dragon riders is our destiny, when he's got his internal conflict going on. And then there's Eugene needing to get rescued all the time because he's trying to prove himself. All of this would lead to the group splitting up, and this is where I'm going to jump away for a minute to focus on his family arc. You know, he starts out, he finds about the dragons, he becomes one of the dragon riders. I'm doing a little bit of retconning here to say that rather than relying on his dad to solve problems, the security problems, or just problems around the town, D'Angelo is trying to help him do that. It's mostly harmless, but you start to run into issues once he has a dragon, because once he has a dragon, he has more power to help his dad, as long as he can keep it secret. He starts to kind of vaguely believe in this, like, chaotic good way of doing things. Because, remember, his dad is lawful good. But D'Angelo's doing the chaotic good stuff a lot. So, at some point, this chaotic good thing that he's secretly doing goes wrong. Probably because of Eugene messing up for whatever reason. D'Angelo gets found out while they're trying to help the adults with some sort of situation. D'Angelo's dad doesn't know why he's breaking the rules, and frankly, I don't think he'd ask. It's a parenting mistake anyone can make. It's not me throwing shade. So this is where D'Angelo's doubts about being a dragon rider, like, really ramp up. Maybe he even abandons it for a few days, but does come back, because he, kind of feels sucked in by the dragon world. Now let me introduce you to the flaw in this idea of seeing his dad in a godlike light. The issue is that it means that his dad's going to be disappointing him quite a bit as well. It's just natural, because, if you see someone as godlike, you're holding them to an impossible standard. So, this is causing friction. Maybe, I do think the start to the resolution of their conflict needs to be a discussion of some sort. And, sure, they don't have to agree. D'Angelo can still, at this point, believe in being chaotic good, because that's going to hold more weight than if D'Angelo kind of just feels like he's forced to be chaotic good and his dad can just pull him out of the trouble. And, D'Angelo's dad still believes in being lawful good. That being said, most of their, cooperation and their growth through their arcs of D'Angelo's dad coming to respect and understand D'Angelo's motivations and all of that And most of D'Angelo's learning to accept that his dad is not this godlike figure will definitely come from once the dragons get... Because at that point, D'Angelo's actions are less chaotic good, and they can start to work together with each other and with the dragons. And now let's talk about Alex. And I am really raking myself over the coals here by suggesting that her character could be improved, aren't I? It's an inevitability. Really, all I'm going to suggest is that you slow down her character progression a little bit. Because she gets over the majority of her fears in 3 episodes, and... Okay, maybe I'm a little jealous, because it's not that easy in real life. Really, just what I'm suggesting is... You know what, I'll give you an example. Because Alex and her dragon were the perfect successors to Hiccup and Toothless without even trying. You know that forbidden friendship thing that was basically the emotional core of How to Train Your Dragon 1? They have that. In Hiccup's world, it was because, human and dragon societies, they're at war. They're not okay with each other. So these two just, chilling in each other's worlds is going to be a bit precarious. And with Alex and Feathers, it's a bit less literal. I mean, there's still some element of, human society being a problem for the dragons, but really the thing is, Alex is terrified of the outside world, and Alex is terrified of animals. Those two things should be a solid brick wall between her and taming a dragon, and riding one, and all that. And with Feathers, she just physically doesn't fit in the human world. Definitely not in their buildings, at least. She is a little bit shy towards everybody who's not Alex as well, so there's that factor. I am suggesting that Alex discover the dragons before Tom, basically before any of the other riders can just jump in and save the day, and Alex has to figure out this dragon situation on her own throughout the course of the season. But you get to the season 1 boss fight, and Alex basically has to take a dive into the deep end because, her friends need her. But, she's still scared of the dragon world, she's still scared of the dragon. The dragon does not feel the same way about her and her world. Alex is afraid. And she still has to take the step and put her trust in this dragon, and they have to go and help their friends. But that kind of just gives you a taste of the kind of thing I'm talking about, of her being slower at getting through her fears. A lot of modern media sort of has this weird thing where they make being scared some sort of quirk. I guess because of the over-focus on bravery in protagonists. But it could be really good for kids to have a show that is like, okay, here's a character who's scared, and here's a character slowly working through those fears and getting more comfortable and getting to a point where those fears aren't as much of a hamper on their life anymore. And that's what I'll say about Alex. Now that we're at the D&D part, I suppose I should once again welcome you to Session 0 of our Dragons the Nine Realms campaign. Let's start off with some rules that are unique to this campaign. One is that when we are rolling for the dragons, I'm going to be avoiding duplicate dragons. So if I land on a duplicate, I'll reroll. And duplicates refer to the dragons that were paired with the original riders. For instance, you might get a Monstrous Nightmare. That's a repeat of Hookfang. Night Fury or Light Furies will count as duplicates of Toothless because they're literally the same. On account of Nightlights, Light Furies, and Night Furies all being super closely related species of dragons. I mean, the Nightlights are even half of Toothless's genetic code, so yeah. And another rule we need to cover for this is related to the rolling section. I won't be cutting my footage at all during that section. So you may see an increase in pausing or repetition or me forgetting to look at the camera. I promise I'm doing the best I can to maintain video quality. The other rule, it relates to the fact that we can't actually have character deaths or a total party wipe or anything in this campaign for continuity issues. So what I'm going to be doing instead is say a character gets knocked down to 0 health and fails their death saves, then they'll get what's basically a lasting injury. And what that means is that this would be an injury that other characters, including NPCs, can comment on. It might have some sort of effect on them as well, like, oh, decreased movement speed when you're walking as opposed to riding your dragon or something like that. Other rules related to rolling include that if a dragon is going to break the continuity or lore of the show, then I have to re-roll on it. Like, say for instance, a Skuldron, they can only survive out of water for a few hours. This wouldn't really be compatible with the kind of traveling the kids are doing within the show, or how the Buffaloed dragon absolutely is, like, magnetically attached to its home. That gives you the sort of idea. And yeah, there's Nine Realms dragons that sort of have this rule as well. From what we know, the Magma Breather dragon is very cold sensitive and really isn't supposed to be outside of its realm. There was a whole conflict revolving around that in the original show. Or something like the Floodfangs. We have no confirmation as to whether or not they can survive out of water for any amount of time, but I would play it safe and say they probably can't. The only other rule that comes to mind is that I'm only allowed to use cantrips or spells that would have a believable real-life counterpart. Like, for instance, Thunderclap is kind of the equivalent of turning on a little portable speaker at max volume. I think all of us have done that to ourselves at least once, right? And other spells like Vicious Mockery is exactly what it sounds like. Now, I will make allowances for spells that are like tied into dragon powers, so like, Fireball is kind of what dragons do. That sort of thing's fine. And we'll start off with Tom. Tom has 22 HP. He has 15 strength because of his climbing thing that he does in the original show. He has 12 dexterity. There's nothing we see that's really for or against him having good dexterity. In this case, I picked the average one. We also have 17 constitution to make up for the lack of plot armor he will be getting in my campaign. And then we have 15 intelligence. We also have 10 wisdom, which isn't super character accurate because he's usually good at knowing who to trust, in the sense that he's too cynical to trust anybody. And then we have 8 charisma because it's a dump stat in the show, it might as well be a dump stat in D&D. Then we have proficiencies in athletics because of the climbing, and history, which, don't get me wrong, this kid's ability to preserve ancient artifacts would have Indiana Jones rolling in his grave, but he did manage to learn historical language, so we'll give him credit for that. Lastly, we have the class of fighter, which, I mean, hopefully that was implied. And then we also have the style of defense. This is because dueling, which is what he does in the original show, did get removed in the 2024 rulebook. That is as long as I am running the little notebook gag. I like my online character sheets. Next, we move on to June. She was an easy pick. She's a bard because of all the storytelling stuff. We have 11 hit points for her, and strength is 10. She doesn't really have any examples in the show of being strong, but she has examples of dexterity, so she gets a 13. And that's really because she likes doing like little acrobatics stuff with her shield. She does have 9 constitution, but the original show doesn't bully her quite as hard as it bullies Tom, so she should be safe. But we have 12 intelligence, which I feel is a little low, but we really didn't get a lot of luck on this roll anyway. We then have 7 wisdom and 15 charisma, based on that character detail I was talking about earlier. Proficiencies are in acrobatics, history, and persuasion. Yes, the history is an overlap with Tom, but it does fit her character between the cultural knowledge, the fact that she also learned how to read an ancient language. We also have acrobatics because of the messing around with her shield she does. I did actually consider rogue for her for a little bit because of the shield thing. And we also have persuasion because of the charisma thing. And now we can talk about D'Angelo. He was an easy pick. He was a druid. Well, semi-easy. He could have been a cleric as well, but because of his focus being more on veterinary work, I figured druid was more appropriate. That also affects his proficiencies, which are going to be medicine and animal handling. HP, we have 19. And stats, we have 13 strength. He's a little inconsistent about it, but he's decently strong. He has 8 dexterity, which isn't really fair to his character, but I mean, sometimes the dice are not with you. Constitution is 17. There's really no argument for or against him being strong, but it seems a little unfair to give him 8 Constitution. Intelligence is 17, as is Wisdom. I'm not going to sound like a broken record. You guys know why he has high scores in the mind-focused stats. And then lastly we have Charisma, which is 11. It is going to be one of his lower stats, just on account of, because in the original show he does have some nervous habits that really don't help him out. Then we have Alex. Alex is the artificer. That was a very easy pick. She has 15 HP. Her strength is 12. She's strong in the original show, but in this like really subtle way that you wouldn't really pick up on. A lot of times that she's riding her dragon, it kind of looks like what you would expect if someone was just like hanging out on a coconut tree, and those things are notorious for being hard to climb. You then have 14 dexterity. She is an inventor in the show, and she was able to make the dragon armor and the saddles, so she has to be good at that. We then have 13 constitution. The show doesn't bully her the way they bully Tom or Eugene, so there's not a good argument for or against this one, but she got the stat roll of a main character. Then we have proficiencies in Arcana. I see no reason for Alex to not have like a wealth of knowledge, just easily accessible. We also have investigation, and granted it's not the traditional investigation that you would expect, but she messes around with the cameras all the time. She could find out anything she wanted. And lastly, we have leatherworker's tools, both from her making the dragon armor and the saddles. And finally, let's talk about Eugene. Eugene is a rogue because his character is very prank-focused. You have 13 hit points and 8 strength. You have dexterity. He does mess around with June's shield a tiny bit, so he was kinda okay. He has 11 constitution, 12 intelligence, and 11 wisdom. All of those are generally kind of average. And then, of course, you have 8 charisma. When I gave him proficiencies, I did give him deception and persuasion, because he sort of knows his way around people. He just makes them feel really sour afterwards. And then you also have investigation and stealth. Those come from the fact that he did find the rider's like little lair area completely on his own. We know that because we know he didn't follow them in, because he was hiding in there for some period of time before they showed up. And there's only one entrance that doesn't need flying to get into. That concludes our character sheets. So next we're on to the most exciting part of the evening. Rolling the dice. We've now reached the rolling section of our session, so I'm no longer allowed to cut my footage. While I'm setting up my dice, I do have a couple of confessions to make. The first is that I'm not very tech savvy. The second is that this is not my first rodeo trying to get the dragon results for the characters. Yeah, you can probably guess what that means. I somehow messed up when transferring my footage to my editing software, and such is the tale of how I learned of the existence of corrupted video files. Yeah, we have to start from scratch, annoyingly, but it is what it is. So, I'll go ahead and explain what our dice do. We're rolling our trusty D4, but because we can only trust it because we can trust it to be the most annoying to roll, we're only rolling that thing once. It's going to tell us how many baby dragons to roll for. We're then going to roll our pink d6, which will tell us whether we're going to roll on our regional tables, which will be 1 through 4, or if we're going to be rolling on the companion dragons tables, which is 5 and 6. The regional tables, pink dice is always going to be which region it's from, excluding Helheim and Midgard, because those are too late game to be practical to get a dragon from, and lastly, our green dice is going to tell us which dragon it's going to be. Green for dragon also applies here, in that on the companion dragon table, it's just in the order that the dragons were tamed to begin with. So, Thunder the Nightlight, Woundway the Misttwister, Plowhorn the Gembreaker, Feathers the Featherhide, and Webmaster the Deadly Spinner. Although, I guess that does lead to... My original attempt was not a complete waste of time, because it exposed a flaw in my plan. I unthinkingly put Thunder onto the companion dragon's table, because he was a companion in the original show, but that conflicts with my no duplicates rule. What I decided was that it'd be unfair to exclude Thunder from the table, so if we roll him as a companion dragon, then we keep the Nightlight. If we roll a Nightlight on the regional table, we re-roll. That's not the only thing we have to go over, though, before we can start rolling. As I wanted at least 90 dragons for all my total tables. So 9 regions, 10 dragons each. But Dragons the Nine Realms, understandably, did not introduce 90 dragons. So I filled out those blank spaces with a How to Train Your Dragon class. Due to some upcoming scheduling constraints, I'm not going to be able to design a bunch of new dragons for Dragons the Nine Realms, which was my original intention with that. But what we're going to do is we are still going to use my randomizer. And just what we'll do instead is we'll find original franchise dragons that fit within the constraints that the randomizer gives us. And, when my schedule opens up again, I'll start using the randomizer for new dragons. But, yeah. I imagine I'm about to make a few people nervous here, but I am using ChatGTP for my randomizer. I will put my randomizer request up on the screen so you guys can read it. The basic gist is that I will give it a region, How to Train Your Dragon. I will give it a 9 Realms region. I will give it a How to Train Your Dragon class, and it'll spit out 3 random words that I would otherwise be using to design a dragon. Now, one of those words has to be an animal, and it's restricted to not giving me, magic or man-made items. But, yeah, that gives you an idea of the results we're going to get. And speaking of, I am going to be putting the results on screen when necessary. Without further ado, though, let's get rolling. Moving my dice out of the way just so that it doesn't interfere with my rolls. Only matters if I don't proceed to drop it on the floor, though, I guess. Where did that even go? You know what? I'm going to use our green D4 for this. I'm not chasing down the little triangle. There we go. We get 2. So we're going to be rolling for 2 baby dragons. I'm actually going to sort of break my green for dragon rule here and just roll both d6s at once to try and roll both dragons at once. We get double 3s, which means we're going to be rolling double regional dragons. Okay. Then, you know what? I want to bring in my d10s in that case. Here they are. They'll follow the same rule. Whatever we land on for pink is region. Whatever we land on for green is dragon. Just speeds up the process and keeps things organized. Okay, did not fall off my desk. We get some sort of 20, or we get a green 20 and a pink 60. We also get a pink 6 and a green 5. Okay. 6 is the Jotunheim region. So both of these are Jotunheim dragons. I don't consider that to be a duplicate because it's region, but there's like a whole range of dragons it could be. 60 and 2. Unfortunately, that is going to be a continuity error, so we're going to have to re-roll that. The second dice. It's a water-confined dragon, that being the Floodfang. We've never gotten confirmation as to whether they have the same weakness as Scaldrons, canonically, but let's just play it safe. Just for fun, it is a 9 Realms dragon that's kind of like a fusion between a manta ray and a basking shark. And it has two like saber teeth, but like flipped upwards on its lower jaw. And it's one of the few amphitheater dragons, so it only has 2 wings, not like any other limbs. Cool stuff. And we get a 5, which would be a duplicate of our other dragon. So let's reroll that too. Oh, the utter chaos. Here we go. Right? You know what? That's fine. 40 is fine. It does mean the kids are getting at least 1 adult dragon in the section, which is a little ironic. So, what happened is 60-40 is the Bubblehorn dragon. This is a dragon that its adult form is still roughly the size of a baby dragon, actually a little bit smaller. And if you want a description of them, think the dragon-donkey hybrids from Shrek, but make them bald and give them spikes. It's a bit cursed. Okay, let's find out what 65 is. 60 and 5 is another adult dragon, funnily enough, that being the Snowtail. Another dragon whose adult form is about the size of a baby dragon. And if anyone's wondering why there's these size dragons on my tables, it's because, for continuity reasons, my encounter tables for the realms are the same as the dragon taming tables. Okay, so Snowtail Dragon. This is a little wyvern. It's a little wyvern, so wyverns are like 2 legs, a pair of wings, and then just the rest of the dragon body. It has kind of like bird-like proportions, not Game of Thrones wyvern proportions. And it has a little like mane of icicle spikes. It also has a horn on its snout, and it has its tail is kind of like a frog foot. And I think that describes them pretty well. So let's move on to the characters' dragons. Starting off with Tom and going in order of introduction. We get a 2, meaning this is a regional dragon of some sort. And we land a pink 7 and green 60. 70 is the Svartalfheim region. Our mystery dragon is going to be a new boulder class. And we have mole, we have echo, and we have granite. Okay? So we'll have some sort of mole dragon. Let's move on to June. We get 40, so it's another regional dragon. And then we get double 70s. So another Svartalheim dragon, but a different class this time. Our Svartalheim mystery dragon is a mystery class. Okay. We get a bat, we get frog, a bat, fog, and obsidian. You know, just a thought, dragons are kind of already largely bat-like, so I could use some luck, guys, with this one. Anyway, joking aside, next we'll talk about D'Angelo's dragon. We get a 6, so it's going to be one of the original companion dragons. And we get a 5. This pairs him with the spider-wing dragon. To describe it, it's got a triangular main body, and its head is connected by a very thin neck. It has a large circular head. It has a standard dragon tail with that iconic 3-pointed spike on the end of its tail. It has 3 pairs of normal legs and then 1 pair of arms. And it's supposed to be spider inspired, so it has a web breath. Now it's time for Alex's dragon. We get a 2, so it's another regional form. We get a double 0, which is essentially 10, so I'm going to have to re-roll that. Because, 9 realms, 10 spots, 10 is blank. We also have a 10. So at least it'll be a pre-existing dragon. We then get a 60. 60, right? Yeah, because there's the 40. 60 is the Jotunheim region. And the first one is Mist Twister. Okay, I didn't consider this beforehand, but Mist Twister is also one of the companion dragons, so I need to take it off the companion dragons table now, then. And what the Mist Twister is it's a Chinese-inspired dragon. So it has that sort of longer body, and it has whiskers. Distinctive features. It has a pair of fan-like wings, and it has 2 heads. You've also, you've seen it on the thumbnail of today's session, by the way. It's the yellow, blue, and red dragon that's a little bit towards the upper left of the frame. Yeah, okay. Then we have Eugene's dragon. We get a 6, so it's another companion dragon, which, let's see, we have 4 on the table now. Okay, so let's change things a little bit. 1 or 2 is going to be Thunder, 3 or 4 is going to be the Gembreaker, 5 or 6 is going to be the... Oh wait, we only have 3 available dragons left on the table for that. Huh, okay. Because we have the Deadly Spinner, and we have the Mist Twister taken off the table, which means that our available encounters on this table are now going to be Thunder, are going to be Plowhorn, are going to be Feathers. So I'm going to go ahead and change the table a little bit and just say 1 to 2 is Thunder, 3 to 4 is Plowhorn, 5 to 6 is Feathers, just to keep things streamlined. And speaking of, we land on the 1. So Eugene gets the Nightlight. But that concludes our rolling session. I'll be back very shortly to announce the remaining dragons that we need to find out for the characters. Those being Tom and June's respective dragons. See you guys in just a sec. Well, everyone, we are back, and I'm not gonna lie, I got a little bit stumped trying to figure out the dragons. But a quick reminder that Tom's dragon is supposed to be a Svartalheim Boulder class, which has Mole, Echo, and Granite as its keywords. I think we can narrow things down. First of all, the Catastrophic Quaken is like a golden candidate for all of those keywords. Unfortunately, I'm a little concerned that this is just too much of a beefy Gronkle in order to, have Tom's companion dragon. And what I mean is that they have a very similar body shape. Really, the only difference is that the Quaken is bigger, and it kind of looks like if you fused a Gronkle with a Bumblebee. The next option is a Fault Ripper Dragon. It's an okay candidate if it wasn't the boss fight of Season 1 in the original show. And in terms of designs, it is kinda mole-like. It's mole-like in concept. The whole idea is a dragon who can't see but who tunnels. The problem is it looks like a Western dragon combined with a drill bit, so not really convincing on the mole side of things. Other dragons that we could consider is the Gem Blaster, another 9 Realm species, but we don't know that it's a Boulder class, and we don't know if it can burrow. The only mole-like aspects are its face, because it has a bunch of whiskers. But that could also be like a catfish thing. When I think mole, I think tunneling. Our final potential candidate is the OG Mole Dragon, which is the Whispering Death. In appearances, it's a little lacking in being mole-like, you could argue. Kind of looks like one of those spiky seed plugs you'd play with as a kid if you attached a tail to it. It is an amphitheater, so it only has wings and the main body. Okay, mole traits. It's sensitive to sunlight. Its debut in the cartoon series actually had all we saw was just a bunch of rocks and dirt getting piled up, showing a tunnel that it was digging, and stuff getting sucked into it, which cartoon animators really like to do that with underground rodent type of animals, which I think in this case does draw some comparisons between the Whispering Death and the mole. So I'm actually going to leave this one completely up to discussion. Tom's going to get a vote of which of those 4 dragons is best for him, or do you want a different dragon paired with him? I get that it might be a little disappointing that I'm not outright picking a dragon for Tom right now, but I just want to be as fair as possible, and the results got a little wacky. Then we have June's dragon, which... Alright, so this one was a little loosey-goosey with the rules, I'll admit that. So, to remind you, it's supposed to be a Svartalheim mystery class. Mystery class is already very broad. And then you add the fact that our keywords were bat, fog, and obsidian. pretty much, I've already said it, but pretty much every dragon in existence is based on a bat somehow. So, the closest match I could find for June would be the Flightmare Dragon. This is a mystery class. It's the only dragon in the franchise, aside from the Mistwister, which is already taken by Alex, that has some sort of association with fog. That being the fact that it breathes fog. So for a Flightmare description, it is kind of your average body shape for a dragon, actually, just with legs that are like proportionally egret-like. So very thin. Other than that, it has a lot of watery inspired traits. So its wings are very fin-like. It has a little bit of underwater deep sea fish going on with its face. And that's the Flightmare Dragon, and the only real candidate I could find for June's dragon. So that concludes our session, and I want to wish you all a Happy New Year, and have a good night.